He was driving home in a hoodie and a luxury car. That's all it took in the quiet back roads of White Hill, a place where black men don't usually drive Lexuses or wear tailored suits under their hoodies. Malik Reynolds became a target not because he broke the law, but because he didn't look like he belonged. Two cops, a fake traffic stop, a planted bag in the trunk. They thought they had caught another easy mark. They didn't know they had just cuffed the younger brother of the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Justice. See, White Hill had built itself a perfect machine, a place where outsiders disappeared into cells and locals learned to stay silent. A town where the system didn't just make mistakes, it thrived on them. But like any machine that runs too long unchecked, it forgot one thing. Some men don't break. Some men break back. Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg or plead. He made a call, and what followed would unravel years of corruption, bury reputations, and flip White Hill upside down. This isn't just a story about police abuse. It's about power. Quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to shout. Because in a world that feared the hoodie, this black man brought the system to its knees with silence, strategy, and one single phone call, and now it's time you heard his story. It wasn't the first time Malik Reynolds had been watched. But this time it was different. He'd been driving for hours escaping the high-rise boardrooms of downtown Charlotte. He'd closed a seven-figure deal that morning, sealed it with a handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His head was still buzzing from back-to-back meetings and a tension he hadn't yet shaken, the kind of tension that only Coltrane could fix. Or maybe a slow drive home alone through a stretch of southern road where no one knew his name. His GPS pinged and suggested a faster route 30 minutes quicker if he cut through a town called White Hill. Malik hesitated. White Hill, never heard of it. That was usually a sign small towns don't usually mean small problems. But he was tired, and tired men make soft choices. So he turned, the road narrowed almost immediately. The city skyline faded behind him like the ending of a movie. The trees crept closer, no streetlights. Just sun-glinted branches casting long shadows on the blacktop. His Lexus purred beneath him, quiet control just like him. Malik looked like a man who belonged anywhere. He wore tailored charcoal trousers, a pressed white shirt, and over it a deep navy hoodie, soft worn, clean. The kind of hoodie that said, I don't need to prove anything. But I remember where I came from. His sister Denise always joked that it was his armor. The way he wrapped it around himself when he knew eyes would be watching. He learned early that the hoodie wasn't just a layer of cotton. In the wrong place, it was a warning, a dare, a weapon. And as he crossed the rusted bridge into White Hill, Malik felt it before he saw it. The weight, it settled over him like humidity, a tension in the chest, the kind of feeling that black men know and can't quite name, like being noticed without being acknowledged, like walking into a room that decided who you were before you said a word. The town looked like a still frame from a forgotten era, faded paint swing sets with no kids, a church on every corner and not a single person on the sidewalks. Then he saw the sign, Welcome to White Hill, founded 1889, population 9, 143, give or take. He passed the sheriff's station, small brick American flag faded and tangled around the pole. A man in uniform leaned against the cruiser out front sipping coffee. His eyes followed Malik's car like a hawk tracking something. It didn't trust. Malik kept moving. He didn't slow down, didn't look left or right. But in the rearview mirror, he saw the man straighten up. Toss the coffee slide into the cruiser. Keep driving, he told himself. But the next turn led to a small gas station, and his tank was near empty. The sign above the pumps flickered half-lit and buzzing. Only two other cars in the lot. One of them a rusty pickup with a Confederate flag decal on the back window. Malik pulled in anyway. He didn't have time to care about symbols. Symbols didn't pay his bills. He stepped out of the Lexus, the sun catching the metal badge on his belt, the custom one he kept on the inside. Not a law enforcement badge, but one gifted to him by the DOJ leadership after Denise's confirmation. A subtle reminder of where he came from and who had his back. Two old men sat outside the station store playing dominoes on a barrel. They stopped mid-game as Malik walked past. One nodded, the other didn't. Inside, the air smelled like motor oil and powdered donuts. The clerk, mid-30s, scruffy beard. Red flannel, stood behind the counter scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up until Malik placed a platinum card on the counter. "Pump 4, please." The clerk looked at the card, then at Malik. "You passing through?" Malik gave a tight smile. "Just topping off on my way home." The clerk didn't return the smile. He just swiped the card and said, "Pump's ready." Back outside, Malik filled the tank in silence. He felt eyes from the store window, from the truck beside him, from the cruiser that had now parked across the street, half hidden behind a pawnshop sign. The pump clicked. He capped it, slid back into his seat, and pulled out slowly. The cruiser followed. No sirens, no flashing lights, just presence. Like a shadow with wheels, Malik's hands gripped the wheel at 10 and 2. His eyes scanned the mirrors every 10 seconds. His breathing slowed, controlled, deliberate. The road ahead stretched wide and empty, but the road behind him was crowded with history. He reached for his phone. One new message. "Denise, let me know when you get home. These back roads make me nervous." Malik typed back quickly. "Still in Whitehill. Kind of feels off," she replied in seconds. "If anything happens, you call me. You know the number." He locked the screen, set the phone down, then checked the mirror one more time. The cruiser was still there, still watching, still waiting. The road narrowed again. Malik kept the Lexus steady, gliding through curves like he was still in control. But the air inside the cabin had shifted. It wasn't fear. Not yet, just tension. A quiet storm pressing in from every direction. Behind him, the sheriff's cruiser stayed close. Not close enough to be illegal, just close enough to speak. "You're being watched." Malik knew the game. He'd lived in 3 different states, traveled across the country. For business, mentored Black youth through legal clinics and startups. He'd heard the stories too many times to count. They followed me. They pulled me for no reason. They searched my car. They made me feel like I didn't belong. Now he was living it. Still, he didn't panic. Malik Reynolds didn't do panic. He adjusted the cuffs of his hoodie, rolled his shoulders back. Hands still at 10 and 2. Car set at 2 miles per hour under the speed limit. The cruiser stayed with him, quiet, calculated. He passed a school zone. No children. Just the blinking yellow light in a crossing guard post with no one standing there. Then it happened. The red and blue lights flared in the rearview mirror. No siren, just the flash. Malik exhaled. "Of course," he signaled. Pulled over slowly to the shoulder. The car came to a stop, engine still running, jazz still faint in the background. He turned off the music, rolled the window down halfway, kept both hands visible on the wheel. The door of the cruiser opened, boots crunched gravel. Malik's eyes flicked to the mirror. One deputy approached, tall, broad-shouldered, white, late 30s maybe. The other stayed back, leaning on the hood, arms folded, hand resting on his belt. The closer one stepped up to the window, leaned down slightly. "License and registration, Sir." Malik gave a small nod. "May I ask what this stop is regarding?" Officer, tail lights out. "Didn't you notice?" Malik didn't look away. "That's unlikely. This vehicle was serviced last week. Everything checked." The deputy didn't blink. "Your documents, please." Malik moved slowly, opened the glove box, retrieved the registration, then reached for his wallet. He handed them both out the window. The deputy snatched them, eyes flicking over the name. "Malik Reynolds. That's me. Where you headed?" "Mr. Reynolds, home." "Where's home?" "Durham. You got business out here in Whitehill?" "Just passing through." "Following GPS, that." So the deputy stepped back, walked around the rear of the car. Malik watched him in the mirror. The second deputy stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to be felt. Malik stared straight ahead. The first deputy returned. Popped the trunk. "Excuse me, we need to inspect the vehicle." "Routine check." "Do you have probable cause?" His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried weight. The deputy's jaw tensed. "We can do this the easy way, Mr. Reynolds, or the hard way." Malik didn't move. "Sir, I'm cooperating fully, but you have not explained the legal basis for searching my vehicle." The deputy leaned in closer. "You're in a small town driving a luxury car with out-of-town plates wearing a hoodie. Don't tell me that doesn't raise questions." Malik's expression didn't change. "I know my rights. I am not consenting to a search." The deputy smirked. "You're one of those, huh?" The sound of boots again. The second officer now moved around the car. Malik's phone buzzed on the dash. A message from Denise. "Everything okay? You still in Whitehill?" He didn't touch it. The first deputy's hand tapped the butt of his flashlight against the window frame. "Step out of the car." Malik's jaw clenched. He unbuckled slowly, opened the door, stepped onto the gravel. The late sunlight painted him golden shadow. The officer gestured, hands on the vehicle. Malik obeyed. No resistance, just quiet defiance. The other deputy opened the trunk. Seconds later, found something, partner. A plastic bag tied tight, white powder inside. "That's not mine," Malik said, turning slightly. His voice firm. "Steady, I demand to see body cam footage. I demand legal counsel. This is unlawful." The first deputy grinned. "You'll have time to make all the demands you want." Cuffs clicked tight. The sound of injustice wrapped in authority. Malik didn't resist, but in his mind a different sound began to play. Not jazz, not sirens. The sound of consequences, because they didn't know who he was. Yet Malik didn't say another word. As the metal cuffs bit into his wrists, he felt no panic, no fear, just precision. He stood still, the gravel beneath his shoes crunching slightly as the deputies guided him toward the cruiser. His hoodie had slipped halfway down his shoulders, revealing the crisp white collar underneath. The image was striking, wealth and suspicion colliding under the southern sun. They pushed his head down gently but firmly, sliding him into the back seat. From inside the cruiser, the world looked different, warped through dusty windows far away but too close. His own reflection stared back at him in the glass. Black, composed, dangerous only in the minds of men who needed an excuse. The cruiser pulled away from the shoulder. The officer behind the wheel, Deputy Hale, said nothing. The second one, Decker, smirked and fiddled with the bag of evidence like it was a trophy. "You boys get 'em easy today." "Huh," a voice crackled on the police radio. "Another one off the streets," Hale replied without looking back. "We'll process him." Dae already gave the green light. Malik caught that. Already, that was fast, too fast. He didn't speak. He was listening now, cataloging every word, every misstep. He watched the town roll by, dilapidated homes with sagging porches, a dollar mart, a half-empty church lot. All of it sun-bleached and tired. They pulled up to the station, red brick, single story. The American flag out front, flapping, tired in the wind. No people, no cameras, no oversight. Hale opened the door. "Let's go, boss." Malik stepped out, still no resistance. Inside, the air was stale, bleach and burnt coffee. A long hallway stretched toward holding cells. A deputy at the front desk barely looked up. Another one, he mumbled. Malik was taken through the booking process like cattle. No reading of rights, no questions asked, fingerprints, mugshot. A full pat-down when they reached the holding cell. Malik turned and faced Hale. "You realize this is unlawful. You have violated at least 4 procedures since the stop." Hale gave a tight smile. "We get a lot of lawyers in here. Most of them don't leave with that confidence." The door slammed shut Malik was alone. 4 walls, metal bench, stainless steel toilet, a single light flickering overhead. He sat, took a slow breath, and waited. He knew the next part wouldn't take long because they had made one mistake too big to undo. They thought he was just another hoodie. But Malik Reynolds was more than a businessman, more than a black man in a fancy car. He was the brother of Denise Reynolds, Inspector General of the Department of Justice. And if he didn't call her, someone would, because that phone on the deputy's desk had already started ringing. 10 minutes later, outside the cell door, there was a shift in tone. A voice whispered, then louder. Wait, who'd you say he is? Not whose. Deputy Hale leaned into the hallway as another officer approached holding a sheet of paper, a file, something fresh out of a federal database. The smirk faded, the eyes shifted. Malik sat quietly, still calm, calculated. He wasn't just playing defense. He was letting the clock tick, because every second that passed, every word they spoke, every breath they took within that building was being watched, now monitored, recorded. Denise wasn't the kind of woman who waited. She was the kind who moved. And when she did, systems shook. Malik glanced up at the high window in the cell wall. A bird passed, freedom was near. But this wasn't about getting out. This was about bringing the whole thing down. Whitehill had built itself a little machine, an efficient engine of racial profiling and legal theater. But today the machine had jammed. It had cuffed the wrong man. And in doing so, it had written its own ending. Corporal Riley Cole didn't like being ignored. And what really got under his skin was the silence. That calm, cool stare Malik Reynolds had given him in the holding cell. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't even arrogance. It was worse. It was control. Like the man wasn't bothered, like he'd already decided how this story ended. Cole had seen all types. Loud ones, pleading ones, tough ones who turned into puddles the second a charge got real. But Malik sat there like he'd been here before. Not in this exact room, but in this exact moment. Wrongfully accused. Wrongfully cuffed. Wrongfully calm. That calmness, that was the first strike. Because Whitehill wasn't built for people like Malik. It was built for obedience, for fear, for silence from the ones who got stopped. And silence was exactly what they got from Malik, but not the kind Cole was used to. Not the beaten kind, the calculating kind. The station was quiet. Midday light slanted in through narrow blinds, striping the dusty floor. In the main office, Deputy Decker sat at his desk, scrolling through intake logs while half watching the security monitors. The footage looped silently, one screen for the cell block, one for the parking lot, one for the intake room. Malik was still there, seated on the bench elbows, resting on his knees, fingers steepled like he was meditating instead of waiting to be processed. You know he hasn't asked for a lawyer, Decker said without looking up. Cole across the room leaned back in his chair. He was spinning his key ring in one hand and sipping bitter coffee with the other. Yeah, he's playing the long game, letting us dig our own grave. You think he's one of those corporate guys, like real money? Doesn't matter what he is, Cole said. But it did. It mattered because the cruiser's dash cam would show there was no tail light issue. It mattered because the so-called evidence in the trunk hadn't been there until after Decker popped it open. And it mattered because Malik Reynolds hadn't reacted like a man caught. He'd reacted like a man waiting. The station's front door creaked open. Sheriff Bowman stepped in, brushing off his hat and wiping his forehead with a folded handkerchief. He moved slowly like a man who'd seen too much heat, both from the weather and the politics. Bowman was old school, the kind of sheriff who ran Whitehill the way his daddy had. Firm hand, quiet deals, no headlines. He liked things smooth, quiet, unbothered. So when he saw the cruiser report listing drug possession with intent and the name Malik Reynolds, something in his gut twitched. Who's this guy we brought in? Cole stood, just some slick type driving through town, gave me attitude at the gas station, hood up dark tint, dressed like he was trying to hide something. He resisting. Not once Bowman squinted. He asked for his phone call. Nope, lawyer. Nope, what's he doing now? Just sitting. That ain't normal. He walked to the monitor, watched Malik's unmoving form on the black and white screen. How long's he been in? About 2 hours and nothing. Nothing. Bowman turned to Cole. You run him, license is clean, car registered, no priors, no warrants. Then maybe he is somebody, Bowman muttered, or knows somebody. Cole shrugged. He'll crack, they all do. Sheriff narrowed his eyes. Son, the ones who crack talk, the ones who don't. You better hope you didn't miss something. The first phone call came 15 minutes later. The desk deputy picked up with a lazy drawl. White Hill police officer on duty. There was a pause. His expression changed. Yes, ma'am, I'll get him. He stood, walked toward Cole, and handed him the receiver. Line 2 said she's from Department of Internal Affairs. Cole raised an eyebrow and took the phone. This is Corporal Cole. Another pause. Yes, he's here. No, he hasn't requested representation. Pause. I see. Yes, ma'am. Understood. He placed the phone down slowly. Decker looked up. Who was that? Cole didn't answer. He turned to the monitor again. Malik hadn't moved. He's not asking for help. Cole said quietly. He doesn't have to. The second call wasn't routed to Cole. It came through Sheriff Bowman's personal line. He answered it, listened for 20 seconds, then 30. His face tightened. Then he stood across the room and said 4 words Cole hadn't heard in years. We've got a problem. Sheriff Bowman didn't rattle easy, but as he stood in the middle of the station, holding his private phone in one hand, and a growing storm behind his eyes, even the deputies noticed the shift. Corporal Cole straightened in his chair. What kind of problem, he asked. Bowman didn't answer right away. He paced once across the office floor, then turned, lowering his voice just enough to make the silence feel louder. That man in holding Reynolds? Yeah, he's not just some guy in a hoodie, Cole. He's connected way above our heads. Connected how Bowman didn't blink. His sister is Denise Reynolds. Cole blinked. That's supposed to mean something to me. She's the Inspector General. Department of Justice, Federal Oversight. Internal Investigations. Cole froze. You're joking. I don't joke about Washington. She's the reason a whole department in Louisiana got swept out last year. If she gets wind of what we pulled here, this station's done. All of us. Decker looked up from the desk, the blood draining from his face. We didn't know. We should have. Bowman snapped. That Lexus has a Federal Service decal on the rear plate. Not visible unless you know what to look for. It's not a rental. It's his. Cole swallowed hard. You think he's already called her? No, but someone did. First call came from a block number out of D.C. 10 minutes later, my direct line lit up. Then the feds called again, this time, asking for timestamps, body cam footage, arrest log. Decker mumbled. We don't have any body cam footage. Exactly. Bowman slammed his palm on the desk, making the coffee cup jump. You two planted evidence on the brother of the Inspector General. You didn't log the stop, no cam, no probable cause. And now they know Cole tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. He'd done stops like this before, routine, clean enough to pass local scrutiny. This town didn't ask questions, but this wasn't local anymore. This was federal. In the holding cell, Malik sat with his back against the wall, eyes closed. He wasn't meditating, he was listening. The shift in the hallway was subtle but real. Quieter footsteps, whispered voices, doors opening and closing with more care. They were unraveling. He could feel it, and he wasn't surprised, because every system of power, when built on fear and unchecked habits, eventually forgets to fear the quiet ones, the ones who don't scream, The ones who just remember. Malik had remembered everything. The fake stop, the planted bag, the smirk, the hand on his shoulder as they pushed him into the cruiser like they were proud of the takedown. He'd said nothing. He didn't need to. Denise always told him, "Your silence will speak louder when they're the ones panicking," and now they were. Back in the main office, Bowman was already dialing again. "I want every camera feed pulled from the street near the stop gas station too. See if anything picked up the cruiser before and after the arrest." "Yes, Sheriff," the dispatcher on the line replied. "Also get me the DA on the phone." Now he turned back toward Cole and Decker. "Get your story straight and pray he doesn't press charges." Cole sat down, hard elbows on his knees. His hands were shaking now. "How bad is this going to get?" Bowman didn't look at him. "Bad enough that we're not the ones in control anymore." 20 minutes later, the call came from Washington. Not a warning, a promise. They're sending a DOJ liaison to White Hill ETA tomorrow morning, which meant the countdown had begun and the strike Malik hadn't thrown had already landed. Night fell over White Hill without fanfare. No sirens, no protests, no headlines. Just a small southern town wrapped in the kind of silence that only comes before something breaks. Inside the holding cell, Malik Reynolds remained still. The cold of the concrete had long settled into his back, but he didn't shift. Still dressed in his hoodie slacks and calm, he waited not because he was stuck, but because he was watching the walls around him begin to tremble. He'd been here before. Not in this station, not in this cell, but in this exact position, boxed in by assumptions, surrounded by systems that thought silence meant surrender. It didn't. Silence was his strategy. Silence was his mirror. It let them reveal themselves. And now they were. In the sheriff's office, the mood had shifted completely. Files that had been tossed aside were now being organized in hushed panic. Intake records reprinted, timelines rewritten. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival. Sheriff Bowman was in his office door, closed voice tight, on the phone. "I understand, sir. We're doing everything we can to cooperate." Pause. "Yes, the individual is still in custody." Another pause. "No, he has not been formally charged yet." "That's correct." He rubbed his temple, eyes bloodshot from the last 3 hours of damage control. Across the hall, Decker sat at his desk, scrolling through Malik's name for the 5th time. Still nothing criminal, still clean. Corporate records showed he sat on the board of a nonprofit initiative for criminal justice reform. Irony. Cole stood at the window, arms crossed, staring into the parking lot, like he was expecting someone to walk in and say it was all just a drill, that it wasn't real, that they hadn't just cornered the wrong man in the wrong way. He turned to Decker. "You think they were going to fire us?" Decker shrugged, eyes still on the screen. "I think we're past that." Cole's jaw tensed. We didn't know who he was. "You think that's going to matter when Washington shows up?" They both looked at the monitor again. Malik hadn't moved. It was unnerving. Not like most people they booked. There was no pacing, no shouting, no calling out for a lawyer. Just that stillness, like a chess player waiting for the next piece to fall. Then came the fax. It arrived with a buzz and a whine from the ancient machine in the corner of the dispatch room. The deputy grabbed it, scanned the header, and nearly dropped the paper. He rushed it to Bowman's desk. "Sir, you need to see this." Bowman read the cover sheet twice. Then his face drained of color. "Department of Justice official, liaison appointment. Subject immediate internal review. White Hill Police Department, initiated by OIG Reynolds D." Attached to the sheet was a list of requested documents: dash cam footage, body cam logs, arrest forms, chain of custody on all evidence, a full transcript of all internal communication during Malik's detention. The kind of list you don't get unless someone up top already has enough to sink you. Bowman dropped the paper onto the desk like it was on fire. "We're done," he muttered. Cole stepped in just as the words left his mouth. What that fax? It's the start of a federal inquiry. Cole's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He walked back into the main room, sat at the desk, and buried his face in his hands. Decker leaned over. So what do we do now? Cole looked at him, eyes dull, resigned. We wait. Down the hall, Malik finally stood. He rolled his shoulders, shook off the stiffness, walked to the cell door and pressed his hand lightly against the bars. Footsteps approached, not rushed, not nervous, just official. The desk deputy appeared, nervous, sweat on his forehead. Sir, we've been informed your release is pending. The charges, they're being dropped. No formal processing. Malik tilted his head. That fast? The deputy nodded. Yes, sir. Orders from the sheriff. Malik didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He just said, tell him I'll walk myself out. He moved through the hallway like he owned it, not out of arrogance, out of certainty. Because this wasn't about being released, it was about watching the house of cards fall. And in Whitehill, the first strike had landed. No fists, no yelling, no threats, just a man in a hoodie who knew exactly how loud silence could be. The release was quiet. No apologies, no paperwork handed back with grace. No handshake to say sorry for the mistake. Just a key turning in a lock and the door clicking open. Malik Reynolds stepped into the open corridor like he wasn't walking out of a jail, but stepping onto a stage. The deputy leading him didn't say a word. The station had grown tense like the entire building was holding its breath. Outside, the air was cooler, crisper night had settled, but the storm hadn't broken yet. Malik's Lexus was still in the lot, not impounded, not searched again, just sitting there like it knew its owner would come back. He didn't climb in right away. Instead, he paused and looked back toward the building. The glass door reflected his image, hood up, frame, straight face, unreadable. In another town, that reflection might look like a threat. In Whitehill, it was one, not because he was violent, but because he hadn't played their game. He had let them build the rope, tie the knot. Now they were swinging in it. The next morning, the town buzzed like a hornet's nest. At the diner, phones pinged with messages. Texts flew faster than orders could be written down. Did you hear that guy they arrested last night? He's somebody. No, his sister's somebody. Like real somebody. Feds coming. By noon, news vans began arriving. First one, then two more. Local reporters hovered on the sidewalks. Mics ready. Anchors rehearsed their openings. This kind of scandal didn't hit towns like Whitehill often. And when it did, it hit hard inside the station. Sheriff Bowman stood at his desk, arms crossed, jaw locked. His morning coffee sat untouched. Across from him, Cole and Decker sat like schoolboys waiting for detention. It's out, Bowman said flatly. What is the video? What video? Bowman turned the monitor. It was grainy shot on a phone from across the street, probably from the pawn shop window. But it was clear enough, Malik standing by his car calm. Deputy Hale talking, pointing then moving to the trunk. The moment the trunk opened, Hale's back blocked the camera, but just for a second, then the discovery, then the cuffs. No resistance, no aggression, just silence. The kind that said, I see what you're doing, and I'm going to make you answer for it. The post had been shared over 10,000 times in less than 6 hours. Twitter was chewing them up. By late afternoon, Malik's name was trending on every platform. Hoodie Power, Wrong Black Man, Whitehill Justice. Clips of the arrests looped on cable news. Analysts discussed civil rights violations. Attorneys speculated on federal oversight. Commentators raged and roared, some defending the officers, others demanding accountability. But Malik, he said nothing. He wasn't at home. He wasn't even in Charlotte. He was sitting in a quiet cafe outside of Raleigh, tucked into a corner booth with his hoodie still on. The waitress, a young black woman with a silver nose ring, recognized him the moment she brought his coffee. "You're him, ain't you?" Malik didn't look up. "Depends who him is." She lowered her voice. "The one from White Hill. The one who didn't back down." He gave her a quiet nod. She hesitated. "They really thought they could just disappear you, huh?" He looked out the window. "They didn't plan for someone like me." She smiled, small but real good. She left the check face down and didn't come back again. In Whitehill, the humiliation wasn't over. At a press conference hastily assembled in front of the courthouse, Sheriff Bowman stepped up to the mic. His tie was crooked, his voice strained. "We are cooperating fully with the Department of Justice. We acknowledge there were procedural failures in the arrest of Mr. Reynolds. We are reviewing all policies." The crowd wasn't buying it. One woman shouted, "Where's the officer who planted the drugs?" Another man called out, "You only care now that the cameras are here." Reporters swarmed, microphones extended, flash bulbs popped, and above it all in a single tweet pinned to the top of Malik's otherwise blank profile sat the words, "Power doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just watches you hang yourself." By Thursday morning, the story had left North Carolina. CNN had it, MSNBC had it. Even the morning talk shows were debating it between celebrity gossip and weather reports. A black man in a hoodie wrongfully arrested in a quiet southern town. His sister, a top federal official. A planted bag, no probable cause, no body cam footage. The narrative was too tight, too damning, too familiar. But this time the ending was different because the man in the hoodie fought back without saying a single word. In Whitehill, denial cracked like old paint city council scrambled to save face. Local businesses pulled ads from the sheriff's re-election campaign. Even Pastor Holcomb, who rarely spoke on political matters, opened Sunday service with a prayer for justice and a warning to his congregation to stay woke, even in the pews. Sheriff Bowman, once seen as untouchable, had become a ghost of his former self. That morning, he held a closed-door meeting with the town's legal advisor and the district attorney. The air in the room was heavy. No greetings, no small talk, just dread. "They've got us on record," Bowman muttered, "and we don't have a damn thing to stand on." The DA leaned back, his fingers steepled. "If this hits a courtroom, it'll be federal civil rights violation territory. DOJ won't even need to ask, they'll demand full access." Bowman paced. "What if we make a statement, offer a formal apology?" The attorney shook his head. "That won't stop a federal review. You planted evidence. That's not just misconduct. That's a felony." Bowman turned to the window. Outside, a growing cluster of reporters milled near the courthouse steps. Cameras pointed at every doorway like rifles. Every step he took now was under surveillance. He whispered like he was talking to himself more than the room. "We thought we were dealing with a nobody." At a local high school just 2 blocks from the station, students weren't talking about homework. They were watching the video. Again and again, Malik's arrest had become a symbol. Some of the kids, black, white, Latino, started wearing hoodies in protest. In gym class, in the halls, in the cafeteria. A junior named Tasha printed shirts that said he didn't flinch across the front. By lunch, half the students had asked for one. The principal tried to shut it down, but the story had gone too far. Too fast, one kid stood in the middle of the lunchroom and shouted, "He didn't yell, he didn't fight," and they still tried to ruin him. That was the spark. Phones came out. Videos posted. Hashtags surged again. "He didn't flinch, hoodie justice." By the end of the day, it was trending nationwide. Malik watched from a distance. He didn't post. He didn't go on camera. He didn't hire a press team. He didn't have to. The truth was doing the work for him. Every hour that passed without a full apology, without charges dropped against the officers, without accountability, Whitehill fell deeper into the hole it had dug. At one point, Denise called. Her voice was tight but calm. "You sure you don't want me to issue a federal statement?" "No," Malik said. "You sure? Let them keep talking. Let them scramble. I'll say what I need now, when the time is right." Denise was quiet for a beat. You've always been the quiet one. Yeah, but quiet doesn't mean weak. She exhaled into the line. You scared them. You know that good. He hung up. Later that night, Sheriff Bowman stood at a podium again. This time the flags behind him weren't enough to cover the cracks in his voice. We are placing both officers involved on administrative leave. Reporters shouted over him. Are you admitting they planted evidence? Why wasn't Malik Reynolds offered a lawyer? Was the stop racially motivated? Bowman stammered. We are launching an internal review. Someone in the back yelled too late. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs, chants. Shame. And standing far in the back of it all, partially hidden under the brim of a ball cap, Malik watched the chaos, hood still up. Hands in his pockets, face unreadable. He said nothing, because this was never about proving anything. It was about letting the truth breathe. And now the whole country was inhaling it. It wasn't just about the arrest anymore. It was about the reminder that even in a hoodie, even in handcuffs, even in silence, a black man could expose a system simply by refusing to be broken by it. And Malik Reynolds had done just that. 3 days after his release, the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General made it official. A task force was being sent to Whitehall, not just to audit the arrest, but to review 5 years of stops, searches, and procedural records tied to Deputy Cole Decker and the entire sheriff's office. 5 years in a town of 9,000. It sent a message loud enough to rattle every police station in 3 counties. In a small newsroom on the edge of Raleigh, a young producer named Sarah took a gamble. She cut their usual political story for the 6 o'clock news and pitched something bolder, a segment titled The Power of Silence. She aired the cell phone footage again. Malik being cuffed, framed by the flashing red and blue. His face steady, then his walk out of the station. No press, no entourage, no anger, just presence over the footage, her voice narrated. Some revolutions begin with fists, others with fire, but sometimes all it takes is a man who does not flinch and a hoodie the system tried to fear. The piece went viral within the hour. In Whitehill, fear had changed direction. Business owners quietly called town officials asking what would happen if civil rights lawsuits followed. Parents called the school district, asking what protections their children had during police encounters. And black families who'd stayed quiet for years began speaking, sometimes in whispers, sometimes not. At the local library, a woman named Sharon held a community meeting. No permit, no microphone, just folding chairs and a printed sign taped to the wall. Know your rights, speak your truth. She'd never met Malik, didn't have to, but she wore a dark blue hoodie that night, so did half the room. Deputy Cole stayed home. He hadn't left his house in 2 days. His truck sat in the driveway. Engine cold, a small dent on the rear bumper, still unreported. His phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. No threats, just links. Links to articles, clips, photos of Malik beside national leaders, advocates, legal scholars. The hoodie was everywhere. Cole sat at the edge of his kitchen table, holding his badge in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. On the table lay a yellowed newspaper clipping from years ago, his first arrest. Back then, they'd printed his name under the headline, Local Hero Stops Robbery in Progress. Now his name was the example parents gave their kids when teaching what not to trust. At a downtown conference in Durham, Malik finally spoke. He didn't give a full interview, didn't take questions. He just walked to the microphone, hoodie up, and let the room settle. It was a panel on justice reform, packed room, cameras, flashing lights. He said they thought silence meant surrender. They thought calm meant compliance. They thought that if they humiliated me, I'd vanish a beat. But I didn't come here to vanish. I came here to remind them we wear these hoodies not to hide, but because we've survived. The room erupted, not with noise, with respect. That night he walked back to his car alone. The sun had dipped just below the skyline. painting the pavement in amber and rust. A soft wind tugged at the edges of his hoodie. He slipped his hand into his pockets, head down breath. Slow, not hiding, just moving forward. He passed a young boy on the sidewalk, black maybe 10 years old. The kid looked up at him, eyes wide. "You're that guy, ain't you?" Malik stopped crouched, just slightly so they were eye level. "Which guy, the one who didn't say nothing and still made him listen?" Malik smiled for the first time in days. "Keep your head up, kid. And never forget who you are, especially when they try to tell you different." The boy nodded hard, like he understood, like maybe the hoodie meant something new now. There's a moment in every story where the game changes, not with noise, not with violence, but with something quieter. Darker, that moment had arrived in Whitehill, and the town wasn't ready for it. 9 days after Malik Reynolds walked free from that jail cell, he became the center of something bigger. No longer just the man in the hoodie, no longer just the guy they arrested, he was now the threat they couldn't contain. And when systems feel threatened, they stop pretending to play fair. They start playing dirty. It began with a late-night message. Malik was in his apartment, lights dim jazz, barely audible through the Bluetooth speaker. His laptop buzzed once, an email from an unknown sender. No subject, no text body, just a single attachment. He hesitated before opening it. It was a photo of his home taken from across the street. Clearly recent. Clearly a message. He stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. No fear in his face. No panic. Just understanding. The line had been crossed. The next morning he met with Ava Brooks. They sat in the conference room of a firm in downtown Durham. She was already waiting files, open laptop on her black blazer, crisp like armor. "They've escalated," she said. "That means we escalate too. They're trying to intimidate me and failing," she added. "Still, this confirms something. They're not just trying to protect the officers, they're trying to bury the system those officers were part of." She slid a folder across the table. "We file next week, Civil Suit Section 1983, Federal Civil Rights Violation. And if we find a pattern, we will," Malik said calmly. Ava smiled. "Good, because this isn't about you anymore." Meanwhile, back in Whitehill, the sheriff's department had begun to fracture from the inside. Cole had stopped answering calls. His mailbox was full. Decker, still technically employed, hadn't shown up to shift since the suspension. Rumors swirled that he was lawyering up separately. Sheriff Bowman under pressure from the town council, and the DOJ held a closed-door briefing. "What's the damage?" he asked his staff. The deputy DA, red-eyed and visibly exhausted, replied, "We've got 3 confirmed witnesses now saying Cole fabricated charges. 2 said they were threatened. 1 says her dashboard camera footage was deleted after she filed a complaint. And the Reynolds case, a time bomb. Once this hits court, we're exposed." Bowman gripped the back of his chair. "We can't let it get that far." He said it like a man used to control, but control was slipping. That afternoon, an unsigned op-ed appeared in the Whitehill Weekly title, "The Hoodie That Broke the Silence." It didn't accuse. It didn't demand. It simply laid out the facts, clear, brutal. What happened to Malik Reynolds wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a window into how Whitehill treated people who didn't look like they belonged. The article went viral within hours. Then the source came forward, a clerk, a mother of 2, longtime town resident. She had worked in the records department of the sheriff's office for 8 years. She had seen the complaints, the inconsistencies, the patterns. She told her story to a local journalist, and the story lit a match. Within 48 hours, 3 more people came forward: a teacher, a mechanic, a delivery driver, different races, different lives. Same story wrongfully stopped. No documentation, no recourse, and no justice until now. At a nearby church, a town hall was called word of mouth. No flyers, no media, just people showing up. Standing room only. Malik stood at the back. Hood up, silent. Observing an older man took the mic. His voice wavered, but his words were steady. "I've lived here 52 years. I've watched people get stopped for nothing, watched kids disappear into that jail. We all knew. We just never thought someone would shine a light on it like this." He looked toward the back of the room. "Toward Malik, I don't know that young man. But I thank God he didn't run. I thank God he stood still long enough for the truth to catch up." Applause followed, not thunderous, but honest, grown rooted in pain. And something else, too. Hope. Back at his car, Malik sat in the driver's seat. He didn't drive off, just looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Same hoodie, same eyes. But now everything had changed, because they thought the hoodie made him invisible. Instead, it made him seen. 2 days after the town hall, the sheriff's office tried to shift the story. A press release was posted on their website and mailed to local outlets. It was filled with polished legalese and damage control. The White Hill Police Department remains committed to justice and accountability. Recent events involving Mr. Malik Reynolds are under independent review. While we await the outcome, we ask the public to refrain from speculation. But speculation wasn't the problem. The problem was truth, and it was no longer waiting. That same morning, federal investigators returned to White Hill. But this time, they weren't just reviewing arrest records. They were collecting testimonies, formal, sworn, and recorded. The interviews were held in a temporary office set up in an abandoned insurance building just off Main Street. No signs, no windows, just a door and a federal seal. Inside, the agents moved quietly. Efficiently, Ava Brooks was there too, smiling when necessary, cutting deep when it mattered. By noon, they had documented 10 separate incidents over 4 years, all with the same names: Cole Decker, Bowman. A pattern was forming, and once patterns become evidence, they turn into indictments. But not everyone was celebrating. On a quiet farm just outside of town, a man named Travis Granger sat on his porch and watched the news unfold. He was one of the old guard retired deputy, longtime friend of Bowman, and believer in the way things used to be. He watched the segment about Malik, the arrest footage, the DOJ's involvement, the stories piling up, and each word hit like a slap. This wasn't justice to him, it was humiliation, and humiliation turned to resentment. He called up a few old names in his flip phone, said it was time they talked about how to take their town back. Not with force, not yet, but with fear. And that fear would start with Malik. That night, Malik received a package. No return address. No name inside was a VHS tape, a cheap, outdated relic, but taped to the front was a handwritten note. "You're not the first, you won't be the last. Play it against Ava's warning." Malik did. He found an old player in his closet used to digitize home videos. He slid the tape and pressed play and leaned back. The footage flickered. At first, it looked like home surveillance, grainy black and white. A front yard. A truck pulling up. A man being dragged from his vehicle by 2 officers. No date, no sound, but Malik recognized the faces. Cole Decker. A younger man, black, early 20s, not resisting. Just like him, Malik watched in silence as the officers planted something under the seat, cuffed the man, and laughed as they walked him to the cruiser. The tape ended. He rewound it, watched again. Not for shock, for confirmation. He wasn't the first, but he would be the last. The next morning, Malik handed the tape to the DOJ team. No words, no drama, just evidence. And that tape, more than any tweet, any post, any testimony, was the blade that cut through White Hill's defenses. The investigation shifted overnight, from a review to a prosecution. By noon, federal agents arrived at the sheriff's department with sealed documents. Cole was officially charged with falsifying evidence and obstruction of justice. Decker, facing pressure, agreed to cooperate. Sheriff Bowman summoned to appear before a federal ethics committee. White Hill's wall had cracked. Now it was collapsing. But for Malik, justice wasn't a press headline. It wasn't a booking photo or a courtroom sentence. It was a message to every kid walking down the street in a hoodie, to every man stopped for fitting a description, to every person who had been told to sit down, shut up, and survive. He'd been silent, but silence when rooted in truth is louder than any siren. And now the whole town was listening. The courthouse in Whitehill had never seen this many cameras. On a normal day, the parking lot was half empty, the front steps quiet, but today it buzzed with reporters, legal aides, and townsfolk who claimed they just happened to be walking by. Inside, Malik Reynolds sat quietly in the back row of the courtroom, hoodie on hands folded. He wasn't a plaintiff. Not yet. He wasn't a witness on the stand. He was something more dangerous, a presence, a reminder. At the front, Corporal Riley Cole sat next to his lawyer, shifting in his seat, his tie too tight, his face drawn. He hadn't spoken a word publicly since the arrest. Now he didn't have a choice. The DOJ had opened with the footage from the VHS tape. No narration, no commentary, just a screen, a frame, a truth too plain to deny Cole planting evidence. Decker laughing, a young black man being thrown into a cruiser for no reason at all. When the lights came back on, the room didn't breathe. The prosecutor rose. "Do you deny that is you on the tape?" Cole hesitated. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Cole looked down. No. Was the man under arrest at the time? No. Was there a warrant? No. Did he resist? No. Then why was he detained? Cole didn't answer because there was nothing to say. Outside, words spread fast. Not just in Whitehill, not just in North Carolina, but in Memphis, in Oakland, in Newark. Communities who had seen this movie before, but rarely got to see the credits roll. For once, the ending was shifting. The villain wasn't just called out, he was being held accountable. That afternoon, Malik spoke to a group of high school seniors visiting the state university for orientation. The room wasn't full of reporters. It wasn't filmed, just kids. Eager, confused, angry, hungry for clarity. One girl in the back, black hair braided down her back, raised her hand. "How did you stay calm when they put you in the cuffs?" Malik paused before answering, "Because I knew who I was, and I knew who they were pretending to be." The room went quiet. He leaned forward. "See, when you grow up black in America, they don't just teach you to survive. They train you to shrink, to silence yourself before the world does it for you. But the truth is, you don't need to raise your voice to make them hear you. You just have to know what silence is worth." The next day, a federal judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to move forward with prosecution against Cole and an internal review of the entire Whitehill Sheriff's Office. In the ruling, the judge wrote, "This case presents not merely a mistake of procedure, but a pattern of intent. The system didn't just fail Mr. Reynolds, it tried to erase him. And in that statement, something shifted forever, because the story was no longer just about Whitehill. It was about everywhere that believed they could do the same." Meanwhile, Ava Brooks began preparing the civil lawsuit. She met with Malik and her office documents stacked neatly across her desk. She was smiling not because they had won, but because they were no longer fighting uphill. "They're calling this one a landmark case," she said. Flipping through the folders, Malik didn't respond. He just sipped his tea. "You okay?" "Yeah, you sure?" He nodded. "It's just, I didn't ask to be a symbol." Ava chuckled. "Symbols don't ask. They happen." He looked out the window. "Then let's make sure this one means something." That evening, Malik took a walk through his neighborhood. No hoodie, just a t-shirt. The evening air was light, the sky turning gold. A kid on a bike rode past him, then stopped. "You're that guy, right?" Malik smiled. "Depends on what guy you mean." The kid grinned wide. "The one who didn't back down." Malik nodded. "That's me." The kid didn't ask for a selfie, didn't ask for a signature. He just rode away, but he rode taller. And Malik, he walked a little lighter. Because sometimes when the line is crossed, you don't have to fight, you just have to stand still long enough. for the truth to catch up. Malik Reynolds never called his sister for help. He didn't need to, because Denise Reynolds had been watching from the moment the cuffs went on. She wasn't the kind of person who sent angry tweets. She didn't do interviews. She didn't chase microphones. She built her power in silence just like her brother. But where Malik let injustice expose itself, Denise dismantled it, systematically, legally, with the kind of authority that didn't shout it summoned, and now the shadow had woken. At the office of the Inspector General in Washington, D.C., Denise sat behind a desk the size of a small car. The room was windowless, painted in soft grays, furnished with the kind of silence that makes even powerful men sit up straighter. She was reading the latest report from the DOJ field team in Whitehall. The tape, the arrest history, the buried complaints, the clerk who blew the whistle. She closed the folder, removed her glasses, and picked up the phone. "Get me Deputy Director Morales." The next morning, a black SUV pulled into Whitehall. No markings, no fanfare. But the moment it parked outside the courthouse, everybody inside knew something had shifted. 3 agents stepped out, one in a tailored navy suit, another with a notepad already open, and the last carrying a flat silver case. They walked in like they owned the place. Because technically, they did now. Inside the sheriff's office, Sheriff Bowman froze mid-sentence as the lead agent placed a document on his desk. "We are placing this department under federal oversight, effective immediately." "What's the basis?" Bowman asked, his voice thin. The agent didn't even blink. "Obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, patterned abuse of power." Bowman looked around the room, but no one moved. His deputies, once loyal, now looked away. The machine he had run for 15 years had turned to dust in his hands. The agent stepped closer. "Also, you'll need to surrender your service weapon." "Right now?" "Yes." Sheriff Bowman reached slowly into his drawer, unhooked the holster from his belt, and handed it over. The silence in the room was deafening. Meanwhile, in Durham, Malik sat at a small table in a cafe downtown. The news hadn't reached him yet. He wasn't watching the feeds, wasn't refreshing headlines. He was sipping coffee, talking to a kid from the local community college who had asked to meet him. The kid, maybe 19, wore a hoodie and nervous energy. He leaned forward. "Can I ask something?" "Of course. Were you scared?" Malik thought about it. "Not in the way you mean." The kid waited. "I wasn't scared of the cell. Malik said I was scared of what would happen if I let them take something from me. Something I couldn't get back." "Like what?" "My stillness." The kid didn't understand at first. Malik explained. "See, stillness is power. They expect fear, rage, shouting. But when you stay calm, when you stay you make them face themselves, and they don't like what they see." The kid nodded slowly. "I don't know if I could do that. You will one day. And when you do, you'll understand power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly and changes the room without a word." And that's exactly what Denise was doing. While Whitehall reeled from the oversight order, her team moved in. They replaced IT servers, secured complaint records, interviewed every staff member top to bottom, and within hours they discovered something even Malik didn't know. Whitehall PD had received over $200,000 in state funds over 3 years, grants tied directly to arrest quotas. And guess who'd hit their numbers every quarter? Cole Decker. And 4 other names Malik had never even heard. It wasn't just profiling, it was profit, and now Denise had proof. She didn't call Malik right away. She knew him too well. She knew he didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. She would deliver it, not with noise, but with policy, with indictments, with reform, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who's been silent the longest. And now her silence was over. The official press release went out at 10:03 a.m. Department of Justice confirms federal oversight of Whitehall Police Department. Multiple ongoing investigations related to misconduct, abuse of power, and unlawful arrest procedures are underway. Lead federal oversight, Inspector General Denise Reynolds. White Hill's name was no longer just a town, it was now a case file. And behind that case file stood a woman most had never seen, but whose presence had been there since day one. Back in White Hill, the agents wasted no time. Desks were cleared, emails frozen, access restricted. Cole's locker was emptied under supervision. Decker's records were sealed. 3 more officers were placed under immediate review, and then came the subpoenas. They weren't just for White Hill PD, they were for the mayor, the town budget office. Even the local judge who had signed off on every rushed arraignment without reading the case file. Denise's team had turned over enough stones to realize this wasn't just a police problem. It was an economic engine built on exploitation, the grants, the state bonuses, the silent incentives. The more arrests they logged, the more dollars they received. The darker the suspect's skin, the more plausible the justification. And the whole town had benefited from looking the other way, until now. At a city council meeting that night, normally attended by no more than a dozen retirees and zoning lawyers, over 300 people showed up. Locals, activists, reporters, young, old, white, black. They filled the room and lined the hallways. Mayor Stevens, flustered and red in the face, took the mic. I want to assure you that the town of White Hill is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. A woman in the back called out, "Then why haven't you resigned?" Gasps followed. Then claps, then full-on chants, "Step down, step down, step down." He tried to calm the room, tried to spin the situation, but power had already shifted. This wasn't his room anymore. At the same time, miles away, Denise Reynolds sat in a small federal conference room across from her lead counsel. Her blazer was off. Sleeves rolled, her laptop glowed in the low light as she typed. Her team had just uncovered an internal memo from the sheriff's department dated 2 years earlier. It was a discipline suggestion from Cole to Bowman regarding a young black officer who had questioned a traffic stop procedure. The officer had been quietly transferred to desk duty. The memo ended with a chilling line. "If they start questioning the system, we lose the shield." Denise stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she stood. "That's enough." Her team looked up. Time to go public. The next morning, she held her first press conference. No podium, no American flags. Just a table, a mic, and one truth after another. "We have reason to believe that the unlawful arrest of Malik Reynolds was not an isolated incident," she said calmly. "It was part of a pattern, a structure, a culture of targeted enforcement and manufactured charges, built for numbers, not justice." Reporters leaned in. "We are pursuing both criminal and civil actions, not just against individual officers, but against the policies that allowed them to operate unchecked." One reporter asked, "Is it true you're related to Mr. Reynolds?" Denise looked directly into the camera. "Yes, he is my brother, and that's why I recused myself from the initial legal process. But let me be clear, this investigation isn't happening because of who he is to me. It's happening because what they did to him, they've done to others. And we have the proof." Malik watched the press conference from his living room. He didn't smile, didn't cheer, just leaned forward, watched his sister, calm, razor-sharp, unshakable, say everything he'd never had the platform to say, not until now. Ava Brooks called right after. "She's not playing around." "Ava said she never has," Malik replied. Ava chuckled. "You two are dangerous? We're patient." "Yeah, and look what that patience just did." In White Hill, things were changing fast. The sheriff's badge came down from the wall. The mayor called a special election, and families who had been afraid to speak were now lining up to be heard. What once was a whisper had become a wave. And behind that wave stood Denise. Never loud, never angry, just deliberate. She wasn't the hero people expected. She was the one they never saw coming, the one who built her legacy from the shadows. and now the shadow had stepped into the light. By the time the week was over, White Hill no longer belonged to White Hill. The signs still read the same. The buildings hadn't moved, but power had shifted from behind closed doors and backroom favors to flash drives, subpoenas, and testimony taken under oath. And at the center of it all, like a steady hand behind the curtain, was Denise Reynolds. She didn't ask for applause. She didn't care about headlines. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to finish it. That Friday afternoon, Denise walked through the Federal Review Center set up in a borrowed school gymnasium on the edge of town. The basketball hoops were folded up against the ceiling, replaced by rows of desks, filing cabinets, and humming laptops. One of her agents met her by the entrance. "We finished running background checks on the last batch of traffic stops, and it's worse than we thought." He handed her a folder. 53 stops over 2 years, all targeting black and brown drivers. 40 of them had no written reason for the stop. 17 of them involved minors. None resulted in formal charges, but every single one logged as suspicious activity for departmental statistics. Denise flipped through the pages in silence, then closed the folder and handed it back. "Add it to the report. We're pressing forward." "We're doing more than that," she said. "We're writing the standard for what won't be allowed anymore." Meanwhile in Durham, Malik stood alone in his apartment, staring at a whiteboard Ava had brought over that morning. It had 2 words across the top: civil versus criminal. Under each were bullet points, names, strategies, projected damages. Ava pointed to the civil column. "You've got a case strong enough to make state history. Wrongful arrest, emotional distress, targeted profiling. We're looking at a mid-7-figure payout. If we go all the way." Malik didn't react. She moved to the other column. "But if we pursue criminal charges, this becomes about precedent. They won't just pay, they'll serve time." Malik folded his arms, eyes still on the board. "What would you do?" Ava raised an eyebrow. "You really asking?" "I am," she thought for a moment, then said, "If I was me, I'd take the money. Use it to fund a legal reform initiative and make damn sure this never happens again. If I was you, I'd make them bleed." Malik cracked the faintest smile. Not from anger, not from revenge, from clarity. Because for the first time he had real choices, not options given by someone else. Not boxes to pick from out of fear, but choices carved from courage. Later that evening, Denise called. She didn't ask how he was doing. She didn't need to. She just said, "We're about done here." How bad is it? Bad enough that no sheriff's department in the state will ever run unchecked again. Malik exhaled. "You did it. We did it." She said, "You held the line." "No, you moved the line." There was a pause, then she asked, "So what now?" Malik looked out the window. The city lights of Durham blinked like quiet stars. Now I stopped surviving." At that same moment back in White Hill, a federal convoy rolled out of town, leaving behind a checklist of mandatory reforms, new hires, public oversight boards, and a 90-day clock for full departmental restructuring. A town that had once run on shadows now had no place left to hide. 3 days later, a package arrived at Malik's door. No return label, no note. Inside was a photo, faded black and white. A young man in a hoodie arms raised at a protest in 1968. Below it a quote, "They never expected us to learn how to fight with silence." Malik held the photo in both hands. He didn't know who sent it. Didn't need to, because he understood the message. Legacy isn't about noise. It's about momentum. That night he opened his laptop for the first time in weeks. He clicked into a blank document, typed a title, Stillness. Below it he wrote, "They thought stillness meant surrender, but stillness was strategy. It was patience. It was power. And when it moved, it changed everything." The fall never starts with a crash. It starts with whispers, backroom glances, a phone call not returned, a handshake that holds for just a second too long. That's how it began for Whitehill. And once it started falling, there was no saving it. The first to go was Decker. He didn't last faced with a federal indictment, a crumbling career and a newborn at home. He folded fast. His lawyer called Denise Reynolds' office with 3 words: he'll cooperate fully. By the next morning, Decker had turned over years of text messages, emails, notes, recordings, from inside the squad car ones he wasn't supposed to have kept. One of those recordings was the night Malik was arrested. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were clear. Cole, he's one of those suit types. Probably thinks he's better than us. Let's bring him down a notch. Decker. You sure, Cole? We'll plant it. Who's gonna check? Just another one with a nice car and a mouth. The room went silent when the DOJ team played that tape. That was the nail. News hit within hours. Breaking Whitehill. Deputy cooperates with feds, hands over audio. Evidence in Malik Reynolds' case. Cable news ran it on loop. Hashtags spiked again. Justice for Malik. Whitehill tape, fall, of the badge Twitter, turned it into fuel. TikTok turned it into fire. And the court of public opinion moved faster than any jury ever could. Sheriff Bowman tried to stay afloat. He called a press conference in front of the town hall. His voice was hoarse, jacket wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The actions of these officers do not reflect the values of Whitehill. We are committed to a new chapter, one of transparency and healing. Someone shouted from the crowd, "Where was your transparency when you buried those complaints?" Another voice followed, "Where's the apology?" Then a third, "Why isn't your name on that resignation letter?" the crowd roared. And Bowman. He walked off without finishing. Inside the town council, resignation talks had already begun. One council member, previously quiet, now demanded a full audit of every arrest made in the last 5 years. Another pushed to dissolve the current police contract and bring in a new force under direct civilian oversight. The air in that chamber had changed. It no longer belonged to the old guard. It belonged to the people who used to whisper. Now they spoke in full voice. Malik stayed quiet. He watched from the distance. He didn't gloat, didn't tweet, didn't smile when Decker confessed or when the tape aired. He simply said to Ava during one of their quiet meetings, "This isn't victory, it's correction." She nodded. "You planning to speak soon?" "Maybe when it matters most." Denise didn't slow down. With the cooperation of Decker, her team filed additional charges, this time under RICO statutes. That's right. Whitehill PD wasn't just corrupt. It operated like an enterprise. Fabricated arrests, financial incentives, systematic cover-ups. If it walks like a syndicate and hides like one, it gets treated like one. The paperwork landed like a bomb. Federal racketeering, unprecedented. Bowman was served at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. He was in his kitchen, still in his robe. The look on his face was one the agents would talk about for weeks. Not fear, not even anger, just disbelief, as if the machine he built was supposed to last forever. He was arrested that afternoon. Perp walked in front of the same courthouse where Malik had once stood in cuffs. Only this time the flash bulbs were louder and nobody looked away. Malik didn't watch it live. He didn't need to. He already knew. Because the moment the cuffs clicked on Bowman's wrist, the story changed forever. It wasn't just about what had been taken from him. It was about what had been restored. Justice didn't shout, it whispered. And then it knocked. They used to call Sheriff Bowman the anchor of Whitehill. Not because he held the town steady, but because he weighed everything down. He was the man who smiled for parade photos while signing off on quotas behind closed doors. The man who shook hands with state reps while his deputies erased dash cam footage from budget cruisers. The man who preached order but practiced silence. But now that anchor had snapped loose, and it was dragging everything down with it. 3 days after Bowman's arrest, Denise Reynolds received confirmation from the federal circuit court RICO charges were officially upheld. Multiple counts, names, dates, evidence, cross-witness testimonies. The White Hill Police Department wasn't just under investigation, it was under dismantlement. An interim force was called in from Raleigh. All weapons were surrendered, badge access revoked, every officer placed on provisional status, a 20-year system leveled in under 20 weeks. And still Malik stayed quiet. He went about his days as he always had, walking to the cafe on 9th Street, helping a neighbor move furniture, visiting his father's grave on Sundays. But people looked at him differently now. They didn't stare like he was a headline. They nodded like he was homegrown justice. In a classroom at Durham High, a teacher played the original cell phone footage of Malik's arrest. The screen paused just before the cuffs were snapped. This, she told her students, is what power looks like when it isn't allowed to scream. This is what happens when someone knows exactly who they are and dares you to question it. A student in the back raised his hand. Did they ever say sorry? She paused. No, they didn't have to, because accountability is louder than any apology. Downtown, a mural began to appear on the side of an old hardware store. It started with a hoodie, just the outline, then a shadowed face, then words across the bottom. Still seen strong. Local artists came in shifts, some professional, some just kids with spray cans and courage. The city let it happen. The building owner paid for the paint. By the end of the week, the wall had become a monument, not just to Malik, but to everyone who wore that hoodie and got followed, to everyone who was stopped for matching a description, to everyone who had to learn their rights before they learned to drive. And then finally Malik spoke, not in a courtroom, not to the press, but at a community center on Holloway Street under the buzzing lights of a small gym filled with folding chairs and folding hopes. He stood on a plastic platform, no mic, no cameras, just people. He looked out at the crowd, families, students, teachers, clerks, pastors, cooks, all of them waiting, not for vengeance, for clarity. He said they thought they could make me small, thought they could turn me into paperwork, into a headline they could bury. He paused, but I didn't raise my voice. I raised my presence. Another pause. And now you've got the mic. So ask yourself, what are you going to do with it? The room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another. Then everyone, not loud, not wild, but enough. Back in White Hill, Bowman sat in a holding cell. No badge, no phone, no lawyers left who'd return his calls. He stared at the wall, that same wall he'd locked people behind. And for the first time in his life, he had to sit with the truth. That silence, when it isn't yours by choice, becomes the loudest sound you'll ever hear. The fall didn't end with a bang. It ended in paperwork, in headlines with quiet fury, in legal language too precise to deny. In a town forced to say words it never thought it would need, like accountability, restitution, systemic reform, and Malik Reynolds. He stayed exactly who he was, not a hero, not a savior, just a man who didn't flinch and made the whole world watch what happened because of it. 3 weeks after Bowman's arrest, the courtroom where Malik had once stood in cuffs was now the stage for something else. Judgment Cole sat pale and smaller than he'd ever looked, the swagger gone, the uniform replaced with a brown suit 2 sizes too big. He stared down at the table while the judge read off the charges: falsification of evidence, obstruction, civil rights violations. Then the sentence. 11 years. No parole. No early release. And then came the words that would echo through legal circles across the country. This court finds the actions of Corporal Riley Cole not only unlawful, but emblematic of a larger cultural failure within the White Hill Police Department. Let this sentencing be not only a punishment, but a warning. Cole didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just nodded once, like he finally understood the thing he had helped build had collapsed under its own weight. Decker received 5 years, but his sentence came with conditions. He had cooperated, turned over evidence, testified under oath. Some called him a coward. Others said he cracked under guilt. But Malik, he didn't call Decker anything because it didn't matter what name the world gave him. What mattered was the record, the proof, the unedited truth. And that's what Decker had delivered. Then came the town Whitehill was given 90 days to implement a full reform plan. The DOJ's outline was strict civilian oversight board with disciplinary power, mandatory body cams on all officers, quarterly anti-bias training, all previous complaints reopened and reinvestigated. A new chief of police selected through an independent committee, and in a moment that would have seemed impossible a year earlier, they did it because they had no choice. Ava Brooks filed Malik's civil suit in federal court 2 days later. It was surgical, 12 claims. 4 agencies named a projected award totaling $143 million in combined compensatory and punitive damages. But Malik had made one request. A portion, $2 million, had to be set aside into a fund. It would be called the Stillness Initiative, a free legal defense network for youth of color in small-town North Carolina. A hotline, a lawyer on call. A promise that what happened to him would not happen unchecked again. Ava called it unprecedented. Malik called it overdue. In the weeks that followed, the public interest didn't die down. It evolved. Podcasts dissected the case. Law schools added the Whitehill story to criminal procedure. Syllabi activists launched campaigns inspired by Malik's choice to stay silent, not out of fear but focus. The mural of his silhouette in the hoodie now finished was featured in a digital Smithsonian exhibit titled Modern Symbols of Resistance. People began traveling to see it, taking photos in front of it, telling their own stories beneath its shadow. And Malik, he visited it once at night, hoodie up. No crowd. He stared at it for a long time, not out of pride, out of responsibility, because he knew once your image becomes a symbol, your silence becomes louder than ever. The final fall came when Sheriff Bowman pled guilty. He'd tried to fight held on with every last lawyer and loophole he could find, but the DOJ had him boxed in grant fraud, false reporting, perjury. They offered him a deal, resign permanently, and serve 7 years in a federal facility in Georgia. He took it. No statement, no apology, just a signature on a plea agreement in a van that left before the sun came up. Malik watched it all unfold from a distance. Never spoke at the sentencing, never sat for interviews. He just kept living, working, mentoring, building the fund, and showing up when he was needed, not when the cameras asked for it. Because some men don't fight to be seen. They fight to see others free. He got a letter one morning, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note. Because you stood still, we learned how to move. Attached was a photo, a teenage boy in a hoodie smiling beside a woman in a courtroom. On the back, acquitted, thanks to the fun. Keep going. Malik closed the letter, set it on the windowsill. And as the sun rose over Durham, he stood quiet in his kitchen, not victorious, not angry, just steady like the truth, still and walking. The lesson wasn't written in books. It wasn't taught in classrooms or preached from pulpits. It didn't arrive wrapped in gold or carried by men in suits. It came from a man in a hoodie sitting in the back of a patrol car refusing to raise his voice. And somehow that silence echoed louder than 1,000 fists ever could. The country had watched it all, from that first stop on a lonely road in Whitehill, to the courtroom confession, to the mural on the side of a cracked brick building. They watched as a system unraveled, not because it was shouted down, but because one man stood still long enough to let the truth catch up. And now people were asking the question, what does justice really look like? Malik Reynolds never claimed to have the answer. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't an elected official. He wasn't even an activist. He was just a man who knew who he was and refused to let anyone else redefine it. And in that refusal, others found permission to do the same. In a small community college on the edge of Durham, a criminal justice professor paused mid-lecture. She turned to her students and pointed to the whiteboard, where a name was written, Reynolds v. Whitehill PD. This, she said, is no longer just a case study in police misconduct. It's an instruction manual on what happens when a person understands the power of restraint. When they understand that stillness isn't weakness, it's a form of resistance. A hand went up in the back, but why didn't he fight? Why didn't he yell like most people would? The professor smiled because sometimes yelling is what they expect. Stillness. She paused. Stillness makes them listen. Malik didn't fade into the background after the lawsuits, after the reforms, after the headlines quieted. He didn't disappear. He turned the settlement money into something living. The Stillness Initiative had opened 2 satellite offices in Fayetteville and Asheville, both fully staffed, both already helping kids who had been profiled, harassed, silenced. The team didn't wear suits, they wore hoodies, not out of defiance, out of unity. And every time a case was dropped, every time a charge was dismissed, they wrote one phrase at the top of the report, informed by Reynolds. One afternoon, a young man named Isaiah walked into the Durham office. 17, scared, charged with resisting arrest, claimed he hadn't even spoken. Malik was there that day. He sat across from Isaiah, calm, patient. Tell me what happened, he said. Isaiah told the story, the stop, the shove, the cuffs, the silence. Malik listened. When the boy finished, he leaned forward and asked, "You want to fight loud or fight right?" Isaiah blinked. "I want to win." "Then let's do both." The case was dropped 3 weeks later. No apology, no explanation, but no record either. Isaiah came back to the office, hoodie zipped up to his chin. He looked Malik in the eye. "Thank you," Malik nodded. "Don't thank me." "Then who?" "Thank the silence that didn't break you." Ava Brooks would often say that Malik taught her something no law school ever had. That character isn't how loud you speak in the courtroom. It's how long you can hold your ground when the room is trying to erase you. One morning, Denise called. She had just returned from a panel at Georgetown on federal oversight protocols they'd cited. Whitehill cited him. She didn't say it with pride. She said it with reverence. "You gave them a new metric," she told him. A new model. Malik exhaled into the phone. "It's not about me." She was quiet for a moment. "Maybe not. But you reminded them that some of us don't raise our fists, we raise the standard." Outside the Durham Library, a small bronze plaque had been installed beneath the mural. It read, "Dedicated to those who stood still, spoke softly, and still changed everything." Tourists stopped to take photos. Students left notes. And people who had never believed in justice began to wonder if maybe it wasn't about being louder. It was about being unshakable. Because that's what Malik was. Not famous, not loud, not flawless, just unshakable. The lesson didn't just belong to courts and classrooms. It belonged to everyday places, barbershops, buses, parking lots, breakfast counters where people whispered before. Now they talked, not in rage, not in fear, but in recognition. They talked about the way Malik Reynolds never swung a fist, never raised a voice, and still managed to knock down a structure built on decades of silence. That wasn't luck, that was intention. In a barber shop on the east side of Winston-Salem, 2 men sat across from each other, clippers buzzing in the background. One was in his late 60s, a retired Army vet, the other a junior at NC Central. "You see what that boy did," the older man said. "That kid with the hoodie?" The younger one nodded. Malik Reynolds. "Yeah, didn't swing once, didn't post nothing, didn't yell on the street, and the world still shook." The barber paused. "That's 'cause he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting right." Ava Brooks had started giving talks at universities. She didn't speak about her wins, she spoke about Malik. In one lecture at UNC Law, she stood before a packed lecture hall. "You all want to change the world. Start by understanding this. Real strength isn't in domination, it's in direction." She clicked to the next slide. It was a still image of Malik Hoodie, up hands, calmly behind his back, being loaded into the cruiser. He didn't win because he fought back. He won because he never left himself. At the Stillness Initiative's New Charlotte office, a former client walked in with a job application. Her name was Jasmine, 24. Single mom, 2 misdemeanors expunged thanks to Malik's team. She said she didn't want charity. She wanted to protect others the way she was protected. The director asked her, why this job? She answered, because when I sat in that holding cell, I kept thinking about how quiet it was. Now I know it was waiting for somebody like me to speak up. They hired her on the spot. Malik didn't chase the attention, but it followed him anyway. One afternoon, a letter arrived, typed official, sealed Department of Education. Inside it read, we are creating a national civics curriculum focused on the modern American justice journey. We would like to include your story. He folded the letter and slid it into a drawer, not out of modesty, out of certainty that the story was never his alone. At a city event in Durham, Malik was asked to stand and be recognized. He didn't want to speak, but a little girl in the crowd shouted, that's the guy from the wall. Everyone turned. The mural was only a block away. She said it loud, the man in the hoodie, the one who didn't get scared. People laughed, but Malik didn't. He stepped up to the mic, not for him, but for her. He looked out at the faces. Some skeptical, some inspired, all watching. He said, I didn't stand still because I'm brave. I stood still because I was tired of running. And when you stop running, something amazing happens. They stop chasing because they don't know what to do with a person who doesn't fold. He paused. You all want to know the lesson? Here it is. You can't always control what they do to you, but you always control what you do next. After the applause, someone slipped him a note. A teenager, handwritten, simple, I was going to give up. But then I saw your story. I think I'll hold on a little longer. He folded it, put it in his pocket, carried it like armor. Because the lesson wasn't just for the world, it was for him too. That no matter how long the night, no matter how wrong the system, a man who knows himself is a man they can't erase. Malik had learned it the hard way, and now he was teaching it back. 1 year after the arrest, the city of White Hill held a public reconciliation ceremony, not a celebration, a reckoning. It was hosted at the town square, where years earlier the sheriff's department had hosted Community Unity Day events, with bounce houses and backhanded smiles. But this time there were no balloons, no smiling photos for the local paper, just folding chairs, a podium, and the names of every resident wrongfully arrested under the Bowman regime, read aloud one by one. Malik Reynolds didn't sit in the front row. He didn't sit at all. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, hoodie up, hands in his jacket, face steady. He wasn't there for applause. He was there for closure. The mayor, now a newly elected reformist, took the mic. We cannot undo what was done, he said, but we can name it, we can own it, and we can vow publicly, permanently, never to let it happen again. He paused, then turned to the crowd. And we can thank the man who taught us the cost of silence. There was no applause, not yet, because the moment didn't ask for noise. It asked for truth. A child approached Malik after the ceremony. She couldn't have been older than 10. Light brown, skin-oversized hoodie that dragged on the sidewalk, notebook hugged against her chest. Are you really the guy they arrested? He knelt down so their eyes were level. Yes, he said, but they were wrong about me. She stared at him for a beat, then opened the notebook. Inside was a drawing crayon, lines, uneven strokes, but it was him. The mural, the hoodie. Underneath, 3 words written in bold purple. We see you. Malik took the drawing gently. Thank you, he whispered. The girl smiled, then walked away. And Malik. He stood up just a little straighter. Ava Brooks watched from across the square. Later, she and Malik sat on the courthouse steps, same spot where a year ago officers had led him away in cuffs. Full circle, she said. No forward. Malik replied, not back to anything. We don't want the circle, we want the path. The Stillness Initiative expanded again that summer. 3 new offices, 14 more staff partnerships with local schools and juvenile courts, and a new policy named in Malik's honor passed statewide. The Reynolds provision, a mandate requiring full documentation of all vehicle stops, transparent evidence logs, and a permanent body cam activation window enforceable by third-party review. It was voted in unanimously. Even the opposition didn't dare vote against a name that had come to symbolize accountability without anger. Later that year, Malik gave the commencement speech at a law school graduation. He wore no robe, no medals, just a simple gray hoodie and jeans. He stepped to the mic. Look around you, he said. You're here because you believe that justice was worth learning. But what they won't teach you in these halls is that justice, real justice, requires risk. It requires loss. It requires standing still in the middle of chaos and saying, I will not disappear. He let the words land. And sometimes it requires silence. The crowd listened not to the volume, but to the weight. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to mean every word you say. That night, Malik walked home through quiet streets. No motorcade, no media, just wind on his face and the crunch of gravel underfoot. He passed the mural again. Someone had lit candles at the base. Not in mourning, in memory. He didn't stop. He didn't take a photo. He simply tipped his head to it like it was an old friend, then kept moving. The lesson had been taught, not in one speech, not in one courtroom, but over time with patience, with presence, with the kind of strength they never teach you to fear but should, because Malik Reynolds never wanted to be a symbol, he just refused to be forgotten, and in doing so he became something stronger than noise. He became a lesson. Saturday mornings in Durham had their own rhythm, trucks backing into bakery docks, jazz humming from second-story windows, mothers coaxing toddlers into strollers, teenagers skateboarding just a little too close to traffic, and Malik Reynolds walked through it all like a man who had nowhere to be, yet everything to hold, hoodie on hands and pockets. No urgency, no destination, just motion. It had been over a year since that day in Whitehill, since the stop, since the cell, since the world cracked open and saw a man they weren't expecting to find, calm, poised, unbothered by the cuffs. But that moment, that wasn't the story. The story was still moving, so was he. He took the long way through East End Park. Kids were already on the playground, their laughter like punctuation in the morning air. An old couple walked a brindle dog with too much energy and too little leash. A man in paint-stained jeans waved from under the hood of a rusted blue pickup. Malik waved back. He liked this part of town, not because it was quiet, but because it didn't ask him to be anything other than himself. He made his way toward the basketball court, concrete cracked in places, but still alive. You could always hear the rhythm before you saw the players, sneakers sliding palms, slapping the ball, the dull thud of missed layups followed by groans and laughter. A group of high school boys were deep in a game. 3-on-3, hoodies, backpacks dumped by the sideline. One cracked speaker blasting old-school hip-hop like it was scripture. Malik stood at the chain-link fence watching. He saw the kid. Every city had one. Fast feet, sharp eyes, hoodie too big, but confidence big enough to fill it. The kid made a no-look pass, grinning before it even landed. He reminded Malik of himself, not at that age. But now before Malik could step away, the kid caught his eye, froze mid-dribble, stared, yo. That's him. His teammates looked. Wait for real. That's Malik. The boy stepped forward, gripping the ball tight. You really the dude from Whitehill? Malik smiled just enough to let them know he wasn't offended. Yeah, that's me. The kid nodded slowly. Serious now. Can I ask you something? Sure, how'd you not swing on him? The other boys leaned in silent. The question wasn't new, but it always came with weight. Malik leaned against the fence. because swinging would have made it their story. They wanted that anger noise me on the ground, and I gave them none of it. He tapped the side of his head. Gave him this instead. The kid looked down at his shoes, then back up. My big brother got stopped last month. Cop said his music was too loud. He doesn't even got speakers in his car. Malik nodded. I believe you. He hesitated. I wanted to swing. I wanted to do something. I know, but you didn't. Nah, and that's why you're here right now. The boy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Malik pushed off the fence. Keep playing, he said. Don't let him take that from you. 2, the boy called after him. You gonna come back? Malik glanced over his shoulder. I never left. Downtown at the Stillness Initiative office. Malik's name was barely on the wall. It wasn't branded. There was no portrait, no plaque, just a small line printed in clean font by the door. Stand still, be clear. Carry on inside. Jasmine and her team were running a legal literacy clinic free to anyone under 25. They didn't ask for IDs, just names, just stories. Malik slipped in through the back like he always did. Not to check up, just to feel the room. A boy with locks and a worn notebook was practicing how to speak to a judge. A young woman was crying softly at a table while a volunteer walked her through paperwork for an expungement. A college kid with a pierced eyebrow was showing his brother how to record a traffic stop safely without drawing heat. Malik stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he stepped outside again. Not because he didn't belong, but because he'd already planted the seeds. The roots were deep now. As he walked back toward home, the mural came into view, his silhouette still watching over the city. Someone had added chalk at the base. For the quiet ones who changed everything. A group of tourists were taking pictures. One of them asked, whispering to a guide, is he still around? The guide shrugged. He walks, that's all we know. And walk he did head-high steps slow, because justice doesn't always ride sirens. Sometimes it wears a hoodie and it just keeps moving. Malik Reynolds didn't chase recognition. He wasn't looking for handshakes, awards, or book deals. He wasn't trying to sit on panels or sell his story to streaming platforms. That was never the point. The point was never to become the story. The point was to make sure stories like his stopped happening. And that meant staying close to the ground. On Tuesday mornings, Malik volunteered at a small middle school library just off Holloway. He organized books, helped kids with homework, and sometimes just sat there reading in the corner while the noise of growing minds filled the room. The librarian, Miss Clara, had worked there for 30 years. She called him Mr. M and slipped him a biscuit every now and then, like he was her own. She never brought up White Hill, never asked about courtrooms or lawsuits, just treated him like someone worth keeping around. One morning she approached him with a piece of paper. I've got a favor, she said. Sure, she handed him a flyer. Career Day this Friday. We've had doctors, firefighters, even a guy from a radio station. But the kids, they're still talking about that mural. They know who you are. Malik, maybe they need to hear it from you. Malik looked at the flyer for a long moment. I'm not a career, Miss Clara smiled. You're a direction. Friday came fast. Malik wore jeans and a charcoal hoodie. No speech in hand, just a few quiet notes folded in his pocket. The classroom was packed with kids, some half interested, some just happy to be out of math class. He stood in front of them, hands in pockets, leaned slightly against the whiteboard. So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a cop, I'm not a soldier. He paused. I'm someone who got stopped and didn't run. The room quieted. A girl in the front leaned forward. They arrested you, right? Yeah, they did. But you didn't do anything. Nope. So what happened? He nodded. They thought I'd panic, thought I'd shout, thought I'd break, but I didn't. Another kid, a boy in the back, called out, why not Malik? Let the question hang in the air, because I knew who I was, and when you know that nobody can take it from you. Not with cuffs, not with lies, not with fear. The teacher wiped a tear from her cheek before turning away. After the class, one boy lingered behind. He was quiet, small for his age, kept looking down. Malik waited. Finally, the boy said, "Sometimes I feel like I gotta act different at school. Like quieter. Less me." Malik nodded slowly. "You ever seen a tree bend in the wind?" "Yeah, does it break? Sometimes. But mostly it just bends right." The boy nodded. "That's what you do. You bend, you adapt, but you never stop being the tree." He tapped the kid's chest. "You stay rooted." Later that evening, Malik sat alone in the Stillness Initiative office, watching the sun bleed through the blinds. His inbox was full requests from reporters, invitations to speak, letters from people saying he saved them. But one email stood out. Subject, "You don't know me." He clicked Mr. Reynolds. "You don't know me. I was a deputy in a neighboring county. I saw what happened to you and what happened in White Hill. I resigned last month. I couldn't do it anymore. I just wanted you to know your silence made a lot of noise in the right places." Thank you, JP. Malik sat still for a long time after reading it. Then he closed the laptop, because validation didn't come from the loudest voices. It came from the quiet ones who used to be part of the system and walked away. That night he walked the city again. No plan, just motion. He passed the mural someone had placed fresh candles beneath it. Above the image chalk, words scrawled in a child's hand. He didn't scream. He stood. Malik stood there for a moment. Then he turned and kept walking, past the corner store, past the bus stop, past the history they tried to bury him in. Because the hoodie didn't stop at justice, it kept walking through parks, through protests, through silence, through the system, and Malik Reynolds, he walked with it. They say movements end when the noise dies down, but this one, it didn't begin with noise. It began with silence, with a black man in a hoodie. In a town that thought it could write his ending before he even spoke. But Malik Reynolds didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to exist on his terms. And now the world was learning that quiet doesn't mean weak, that calm doesn't mean compliant, that stillness doesn't mean stuck, because the hoodie kept moving. Months passed. The Stillness Initiative opened 2 more chapters in Greensboro, and Charlotte volunteers came from everywhere. College students, retired, public defenders, former defendants turned advocates. Each office had one unspoken rule. We don't fight to be feared, we fight to be free. Every intake began with a story. No forms first, no ID demands. Just this. Tell us what happened. Because Malik understood the power of being heard, even if no one said a word in response. One afternoon, while walking through Durham's farmer's market, Malik was stopped by a woman in her 70s. She wore a red Sunday hat and smelled like fresh biscuits. "Baby," she said, "you're him, ain't you?" Malik nodded gently. "You didn't let them break you." "No, ma'am." She took his hand. "You gave us something back we ain't had in a long time." "What's that dignity?" She squeezed once and walked away. That night, Malik sat at his kitchen table with a worn notebook. No laptop, no headlines, no camera lens. Just pen and paper. He flipped to a blank page and started writing not a speech, not a legal memo. A letter to the ones who wear the hoodie after me. You may not get the luxury of being loud. You may be told that your calm is weakness or your silence is submission. They'll want to see fear in your eyes. Don't give it to them. They'll try to make you forget your name. Remember it louder. You are not a threat. You are the proof that power doesn't need to be violent. You are what they never planned for. A man who knows exactly who he is. So stand still if you need to walk. If you're ready, run if you must. But never let them make you disappear, because the hoodie is not hiding. It's holding history. Dignity, firewalk with it, ma'am. The next morning, he dropped the letter off at the Stillness Initiative's Durham chapter. He handed it to Jasmine. "What's this?" she asked. "Something for the kids. Read it to whoever walks in." Scared Jasmine opened it, scanned the first lines, then looked up at him. "You sure you're not writing a book?" Malik smiled. Not unless it's the kind that fits in a back pocket. A month later, a 17-year-old boy named Andre walked into the Charlotte office. He'd been stopped, questioned, and harassed just outside his school. No charges, no explanation. He was angry, embarrassed. He sat down across from a caseworker and said, "I kept thinking about that dude. You know the one from White Hill? The one who didn't even flinch?" The caseworker smiled. "We got something for you to read." They handed him Malik's letter. Andre didn't say much after that. But he came back 2 days later with a hoodie on and an application to volunteer. Malik never asked for followers. He never asked for a legacy. But sometimes legacy chooses you, and all you can do is carry it. Late one evening after a long day, Malik returned to the park bench near the mural. The streetlights hummed. The breeze moved slow. A small group of teens stood beneath the painting, laughing, taking photos. One of them turned and spotted him, whispered, pointed. He raised a hand in greeting but didn't move. Then he heard it, just barely. One of the kids said, "That's him. That's the man who walks. Not runs, not fights, walks." That was enough. And so he did past the murals, past the memory, past the myths they tried to write about him. He didn't turn around because the world didn't need him to speak anymore. It just needed to remember that a hoodie didn't have to mean hiding. Sometimes it meant hope. Sometimes it meant healing. And sometimes it meant walking forward without asking permission. Sometimes the loudest power is the one that never raises its voice. Malik Reynolds didn't fight with fists. He didn't shout in the streets. He didn't break windows or burn bridges. He walked through fear, through injustice, through a system designed to erase him. He stood still when they told him to run. He stayed calm when they begged him to crack. And in doing so, he changed everything. Not because he was loud, but because he was undeniable. This story wasn't just about Malik. It was about you. About the kid wearing a hoodie in a store who gets followed. About the teenager who gets pulled over for fitting a description. About the father teaching his son how to talk to a cop without sounding angry. About the sister who stays silent in the courtroom because she knows the truth will rise on its own. This is your story too. And now the question isn't whether they'll listen, it's whether you'll keep walking. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself, your family, your community in Malik's journey, then don't let the message stop here. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories. Share this video with someone who wears a hoodie and walks proud. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. Leave a comment and tell us, when did you realize your silence was power? Let's carry these stories together. Let's walk, not just to remember, but to remind them we're still here, we're still moving. And we don't need noise to be heard. This has been Silent Power Stories, real lessons, real stillness, real strength. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, the hoodie walks on.